Hey, folks, we're on for a special show on the Simply Trade podcast. We're going to be talking about some important things today. And before we get too far into it, as we're recording this, I guess you're gearing up to head, you and your team are gearing up to head to the ICPA conference here shortly. And it's kind of, we're into the conference season, I guess it's going on, right?
Right. So today's February 25th, Wednesday, when we're recording this. And because it is a special show, it very likely is publishing today as well. But let's hope let's hope that the audio gods are in our favor here. And so we're able to publish that. But anyway, yes, and we're heading out to ICPA. And unfortunately, we were trying to split ourselves up. And I think you were trying to make your way up to TPM. Yeah. And TPM and ICPA are at the exact mirror dates.
Times.
Unfortunately, we can't do that. So we're going to skip on that. Although our guest, the company she works for, may be splitting up that way, but our guest is going to be at ICPA. She's like a staple of ICPA when it comes to you. It's like, if you don't see Lila at ICPA, it's like, what the heck is going on? Something's wrong, you know?
Yeah, I think so. So I've been pregnant at ICPA, but then, I've also missed ICPA because either like I couldn't travel because I was pregnant or because my kids were just born and it was pretty hard to leave when they were newborns. It's still hard to leave even now. But this time we're making it a family affair and I'm bringing my kids with me to San Antonio. So they're excited about that.
Of course, there's a SeaWorld out there.
I'm sorry I'm missing it because I love San Antonio. It's so great. And anyway, for those that are going, I'm sorry I'm missing it, but I know Lalo and your team's going to be there, and Lila, you're going to be there, and so many great folks. So it's such a great organization.
I think they got a record crowd this year, just so everybody understands. They're up to nearly 1,000 on site. Before they hit 1,000 on-site combined with virtual, but on-site, they are so close to hitting 1,000. I mean, like within maybe 20 or so, so it's going to be huge.
It's a great conference and all that. So folks, as you're listening to this, definitely, if you've not made your decision yet to go, get on there and register to ICPA. It's such a great organization, such a great group of people, and you will definitely enjoy and not regret expanding your network. Speaking of all that, we need to talk and move into what we're talking about today, which is most folks have probably heard by now that the Supreme Court has ruled basically against the administration on the tariffs being set using the IEEPA, provision. And so with that, the fallout of that has been some confusion. There's still it's like, well, what's going to happen? And, some of the, are we going to get a refund or not? Are we going to, is it moving into some other situations? So Lila, why don't you go ahead and open up with your general thoughts so far with the current situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really important for our listeners to understand the scope of what has gone on. So the two lawsuits that generated the Supreme Court case and generated the ruling the Supreme Court handed down are specific to the tariffs that were issued under IEEPA. So that's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and that's what was used to levy the reciprocal tariffs. So these are the tariffs that were levied globally on every country that was sending goods to the U.S., and also the fentanyl tariffs that were levied against China, Canada, and Mexico. So that's the scope. This does not affect anything regarding your Section 232 tariffs on like steel, aluminum, copper, and other things. It does not affect any of the Section 301 tariffs, right? So we're simply talking about the IEEPA tariffs, which are reciprocal, and the fentanyl tariffs. And what the Supreme Court ruled was that IEEPA does not authorize the use of tariffs, that was not the right vehicle to be able to do these tariffs. Not that President Trump or any president could not levy tariffs, but simply that they cannot levy it through IEEPA, that there are other mechanisms to do this. So a few key points from the many different decisions that were written, within the scope of the majority were that tariffs are a tax. The power to tax is a core legislative power. This is a power that is congressional, and that they can delegate this partially to the executive branch, but that they have to do so with very clear language. And the administration's argument for using IEEPA was that IEEPA authorizes the executive to regulate imports, and they wanted to use a very broad definition of what that meant to regulate. And the Supreme Court said, nope. If it's going to be such a huge economic issue like this, that's billions up to trillions of dollars, you have to have very clear authorizing language from Congress to delegate that kind of authority. And IEEPA ain't it, right? So that you go use any of these other options that are already very clearly authorizing tariffs for the executive branch.
And you said something really interesting there, Lila. Normally, a decision will come down with like the for and the against, write up or decision. This one,
Yep.
I mean, it's not always this case. I mean, sometimes there'll be a couple more and everything, but this one was very interesting. It had 7 different decisions out of the 9 justices wrote their opinions.
Yes.
And they all, although the ones for agreed in general and the ones against also agreed in general, but the way they got there was very different. No, I mean, that was, I'm not an attorney, and excuse me, I my extent of reading contracts is whatever we do here at Global Training Center to sell you training and to sell you like learning management systems and all that. But aside from that, I mean, I don't read too much into the legal stuff. So
I'm a law student.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Actually,
that's why I'm asking
this
you.
semester I'm in constitutional law. And so then from a law student perspective, this is fascinating, right? To be able to read the different opinions, and they're talking about the major questions doctrine and non-delegation and what are the core powers of each of the branches. And so then for a student, this is really cool. And so for lawyers, I imagine so as well. But yes, it was very, very interesting that you had so many different justices write opinions on this. You had 2 different justices with different dissenting opinions because everybody had very strong feelings about this case and the reasons both for and against. So part of the majority agreed that this fell under the major questions doctrine, which is basically that this was a question of such significance, such economic significance to the country that you had to have very clear language from Congress to be able to authorize that activity. That you could not use a vague statute to be able to say, I'm going to levy hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs that are paid by U.S. companies and ultimately U.S. consumers. And so then that was one of the arguments. One of the other arguments was that essentially, when you look back at the legislative history of IEEPA, of when it was enacted, that it's very clear that Congress never intended it to include tariffs. That's another theory upon which you can say IEEPA is not appropriate for the use of tariffs. On the dissenting side, Kavanaugh, who wrote the main dissenting opinion, really felt that tariffs fell under foreign affairs. And traditionally, the majority of foreign affairs activity is within the executive branch. And he believed that there needs to be extreme deference to the executive branch on anything dealing with foreign affairs. And so that the major questions doctrine should not apply, and that they should have allowed that authority for the president to declare a national emergency based on their own discretion and to apply tariffs as appropriate as within their decisional authority. The majority just didn't agree. And then you have Thomas, who wrote another dissenting opinion where he doesn't necessarily disagree with Kavanaugh, but he takes it a major step further and believes that Congress has delegated their tariff authority to the president and that Congress can delegate nearly all of their core legislative powers to the president if they wish. I'll tell you, for me, just as a law student and others who are actual lawyers think that argument is pretty specious, that it doesn't hold water when you look at really the intentions of the founders and the intentions of the Constitution. But that's not something that I think matters so much in the context of trade compliance. It's just an interesting legal argument.
As we're going through this, I mean, the one thing that I personally, from what you were talking about, and I look at it, so the decision's made, so it's not a case of arguing, but I just look at it going, if under IEEPA or even the congressional authority that was delegated to the president's position, says that basically the president can, regulate certain aspects in negotiate a trade deal and all that. What I don't understand is why does that not include setting tariffs? Because that to me, it's like that's all part of it, because the whole purpose of a tariff initially, aside from your initial, revenue generation, is to, shall we say, motivate a country to change their behavior, hence the 301 tariffs and some of that kind of stuff. But in the midst of all this has been, now we've got a heck of a mess on our hands.
Yeah. So I would say, the argument, part of the core argument for why tariffs are not just automatically included in that regulate importation language is that tariffs are a tax, right? And I think, the majority of justices really agree tariffs are a tax, because who pays the tariffs? U.S. companies pay the tariffs, right? And they're paid on imports, and that's viewed as a tax. And that the power to tax is a core legislative power described and enumerated in the U.S. Constitution for legislative power, right? And so then that was a power that was not granted to the executive. And if you look at kind of the history of the founding of the United States, tariffs were one of the reasons why we ended up with an American Revolution and a separate country in the first place, right? Look at the Boston Tea Party, right? And there was this attitude that the king could just levy any tariffs that he wanted upon the colonies, and there was a large rejection of that. And that's part of why then you ended up with the U.S. Constitution being one where they did not put the power to tax and tariffs as part of that in the hands of the executive branch. They put that in the congressional branch. The idea being that you have, a more balanced argument and process when it's something that is handled by all of these elected representatives of the people versus having one person making that. What Gorsuch, our main majority opinion, Gorsuch also wrote a very long companion majority opinion to that,
Right.
That's got some really excellent information in that. But that's a key point there, is that this was meant to be a legislative power.
Well, and to your point, and that's where, and Lalo and I have had this discussion, and we've gone back and forth, where I have always thought it's like, okay, first off, I think these trade deals that presidents have been able to over the years, negotiate is fine. I know that in the past, there have been situations where once a trade deal has been reached, then Congress is supposed to ratify that. And somewhere along the line, that has not happened in a long, long time. I mean, it didn't happen under, I think Bush had some trade deals. I think Obama did. And
It happened under Obama. So there were new trade deals that were ratified under Obama. I believe that included Panama and Chile and no, TPP didn't happen.
No,
they abandoned TPP. So that was under the first Trump administration. That was one of the very early in the first Trump administration. Right. They withdrew.
It never got
from
ratified,
the Trans-Pacific
I guess
Partnership.
is what it is that
yeah,
what we
so,
were talking about.
So that's again, that comes from the Constitution saying that the executive branch can make treaties, but that then the Senate is responsible for approving, ratifying those treaties. Mm-hmm. They don't have to approve any withdrawal from the treaties, but they do have to approve entering into the treaty.
Well, and to your point, and this is where I think the Trump administration made the mistake. I would have thought that, with all these different trade deals, and people were these countries were at the table quick. And it's like, okay, work out the trade deal, but then send it to Congress, put the monkey on their back, if you will, to approve it or disapprove it or however they wanted to do it. And the unfortunate is right now there's a mess. So I guess as we're talking through this, forget the woulda, coulda, shoulda. It's like what's happened now is the Supreme Court has moved against the tariffs that were levied. I don't know how that affects the trade deals themselves necessarily, except the trade deals themselves, for those that have been ratified, are okay, but then are signed, I say ratified, let me rephrase that have been, I guess, signed and approved by these different countries. I guess that there's some countries now that are like, well, now wait a minute, like India and Indonesia have already postponed their trips to the U.S. and all of that. So that's the other thing, is that some of these trade deals that had not been finalized in some of these countries are now in question. On the flip side of that now is what has happened, and I think it's under the current regulations or legislative, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, has now been putting, or Lalo, you and I were talking about this, where he said he started out with a 10% and then realized he had up to 15%. So he went ahead and issued a 15% across the board as far as tariffs go.
Yeah, so I think it would be really unwise for any of the countries that already have current trade deals with the U.S. to withdraw from those trade deals. Because the thing is in the thing that I think all trade compliance professionals need to understand and make sure they're communicating with their leadership about is that this doesn't remove the power of the Trump administration to issue new tariffs. Not at all, right? It simply says, hey, you used the wrong method, right? And they used IEEPA because they could do that through an executive order. It was the fastest way to implement tariffs, and that was part of what they wanted to do, is hard and fast across the board. We're going to do tariffs on everybody, right? Because we're going to show the world that we're going to move really hard and you've got to come to the table and meet our terms, right? But IEEPA is not the right mechanism, so you can't use that. But there's still plenty of other options for the Trump administration to levy tariffs. So the immediate reaction was that they implemented Section 122 tariffs. So it was announced on Friday. The customs message came out, I believe, Monday or Tuesday, implementing it at a 10% level. So the Section 122 tariffs are really just a stopgap because it's not something that is permanent. You have a limited time frame for how long those tariffs can apply before then it goes to Congress to be able to reauthorize doing those. Congress isn't going to vote for that, right? So they may not have been super vocal with the Republican majority about opposing Trump's tariffs, but they're not actually that popular within the Republican Party. And so they're not going to reauthorize Section 122. So Section 122 is only going to last for the statute of limitations. I believe that's 120 or 150 days is what they have for that initial one. He did state on social media that President Trump stated that he was going to raise it to 15%. We have not seen a follow-up CSMS message implementing that and raising that to the 15% level. But that's one section. So then you've got Section 232. We've already got Section 232 tariffs in place for things like steel, aluminum, copper. They have already initiated other Section 232 investigations, and they can do more. I think Section 232 is actually a much smarter way of going about and doing tariffs based on the end goal that the Trump administration has stated of returning manufacturing to the United States, right? If you want to increase U.S. manufacturing, then you want to target the specific industries where you're trying to bring manufacturing back, right? There's no reason to go after low-value textiles where, those are textile manufacturing is something where you need to greenfield all of that. It is one where they are always pursuing the lowest cost of labor. Those are dangerous jobs where people get physically injured all the time. And so then that's really not the type of manufacturing you want to target. Go after the specific industries that you want to be done in the United States. Pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, steel and aluminum that they've already done from a national security standpoint. It makes more sense to use 232 to be really targeted with where you want manufacturing to increase within the U.S. But beyond that, then you've got Section 301. Again, you have to do investigations, but you can be even broader with Section 301 because you can do it on a whole country level like they did with the China Section 301 tariffs. So there's still a lot of tools in the administration's arsenal to be able to use tariffs as a national security tool, as a policy tool, as a regulating imports tool.
So in the short term, it appears that the IEEPA associated tariffs are going to be stopping, but on the flip side, there's thousands and thousands of dollars. And as far as my company goes, can I get my money back?
Refunds is a huge question, and that's a really complicated question. I'll tell you right now, no one knows the final answer to that question. No one knows the final answer.
Well, I know that the Supreme Court...
We can all talk about it.
Yeah, well, the Supreme Court specifically did not address the issue.
Do a Control F on the decision and go find where they mention refunds. The only mention you'll find of it is in Kavanaugh's dissent, where he says, hey, you guys didn't say anything about refunds, right? That the majority did not mention refunds. So I'm disappointed that they didn't say anything about refunds. I think that they should have given specific direction on who would be eligible to receive a refund, right? And so then I think absent that direction is really not a good place to be in. When CBP announced that they were going to require importers to be signed up for ACH to receive refunds going forward, I think a lot of people interpreted that, which this happened before the decision came out. A lot of people interpreted that, reasonably so, to mean that CBP was going to issue refunds for IEEPA through ACH in an automated way, right? Because CBP has all the data to know who paid IEEPA tariffs. That's why we have a million different Chapter 99 HTS codes, where they had to increase the number of HTS codes per line to like for 34 per line, is because they know specifically who has paid IEEPA tariffs. So they have the data, but they're not going to do that. I think that, you had President Trump on the day of the decision say that refunds would have to be litigated. You have Treasury Secretary Bessent, who came out over the weekend and echoed that same sentiment, saying that refunds would have to be litigated. They do not have an intention, as far as what we know at this time, for CBP to do automatic refunds. And so then you look at, what does that process look like instead? So the majority of the customs entries that have been done with IEEPA tariffs are done in the last 10 months because these tariffs were only implemented about a year ago. So you've got the majority that have been done within the last 10 months where they're still eligible to be able to do both post-summary corrections, because you can do a post-summary correction up until I think it's a week or 2 weeks before the liquidation date, right? And it has to be before it's liquidated. So you can do a post-summary correction to try to request a refund. That's an option. It does take work to do that. You're going to have to work with your broker to be able to get those post-summary corrections filed. You and everybody else and their mama is trying to get that done, right, to be able to get their money back. And so then, you have to know that this is going to be a huge amount of volume that CBP is going to receive. But problem is, there is no required timeline for customs to process your post-summary correction. There is none. There's nothing that says that they have to respond to it at all. They could just sit on your post-summary correction and let your entry liquidate as is with the IEEPA tariffs that you paid. And then you have to move on to the next step. So you can file PSCs, but there's no guarantee that customs is actually going to process your post-summary correction. They could do nothing with it and let your entry liquidate. So then if you've got an entry that is really close to liquidation or already has liquidated, next step is you can do a protest, right? And so then you can do a protest. If you do a protest, it can take up to 2 years from the date of protest for customs to process your protest. The other option within that is 90 days after you filed your protest, you can file a request for accelerated disposition. So you have to do that by a certified mail or registered mail. But once you do that, then you start a 30-day clock for a response from customs, or it's automatically considered denied. So it doesn't mean that they actually have to respond, because if they don't respond in 30 days, it's just considered denied, so that then you can move on to the next step, which is suing in the Court of International Trade. And if you are going to bring a lawsuit against CBP to try to get your refunds, it must be in the Court of International Trade. This was part of what came out of that Supreme Court decision, is because there were 2 different suits that were consolidated for the Supreme Court case. The one that was in the CIT, it was remanded back to the Court of International Trade for implementing the judgment consistent with the Supreme Court decision. There was another one that had gone through the federal district court for DC, and that one was dismissed for lack of jurisdiction because they said, hey, wrong venue. You're not supposed to file this type of case in just any federal court. These all need to go through CIT. So there are a lot of importers that have already filed claims with the Court of International Trade, but it remains to be seen how those are going to be processed and what's going to be the ultimate outcome from that.
So it sounds like administratively it would be wise to, if your entries have not liquidated, that it would be wise to go ahead and get with your broker to get a PSC or post summary correction filed, and that's done electronically.
It is, but it still requires all of the data, pulling that together to make sure that you understand all of the different entries and the IEEPA tariffs paid per entry that you are requesting refunds on. And that's a lot. And so,
Yeah.
and that's something where it's a separate charge that your broker's going to charge you, reasonably so, because it's extra work beyond the entry fee that you already paid to be able to file those PSCs. So no matter what, you're going to spend some money to be able to get that money back. And it's unclear, are you going to get those PSCs processed by customs and actually get a refund, or are they going to sit? Are you going to have to do a protest? And is that protest going to be accepted and you're going to get a refund? Or are they going to sit on it or deny or let it go through automatic denial if you request accelerated disposition? And are you going to have to do a CIT case anyway? And going through a court case is quite expensive and time consuming. And so then there's going to be some importers who just don't do it. But if the administration wants to really make this difficult, or they just want to delay it as long as possible to have those refunds, say, paid under the next administration and not have to pay those out under the Trump administration, there's ways to do that, right? They can drag this out if they want to.
That's what I was going to say, is that administratively, if it's enough time, put your PSC in, but then, you could forget that, go ahead and go and prepare your protest, and just, even though you can also ask for an accelerated liquidation date too, you can move that up, or just wait till it's liquidated and then go ahead and transmit that before you start heading down the CIT. Once a protest is filed, yes, it can sit there for up to 2 years. Regardless, you'll still have that safety net if you feel like you need to file a case with the CIT.
Yes, and you do not have to do a PSC and or a protest to file a case in the CIT. You don't have to do it in that order. That's kind of the timeline of what you could follow, but you don't have to wait for a PSC and a protest to file a claim at CIT. Like I mentioned, thousands of importers have already done this and filed cases at CIT. So you don't have to go through a PSC and a protest to then take it to the CIT. The other thing that I'll mention is, customs has the ability to extend liquidation as well. And so then that's another thing that could happen is you file a PSC and they just keep extending your liquidation date and don't answer your PSC, right? And it sits there.
Well, and the other is, in filing a protest too, the other side of that is, again, it can keep getting bumped out just because of the whole case. But a protest is going to be less expensive generally than a case with the CIT, because your
Absolutely.
legal fees are way on up.
Yeah. And I think it's something where a lot of importers are going to want to just keep watch of what's going on in the news as far as what information they can glean about our other importers filing PSCs and getting no response. Are they filing protests and having them denied? Like, what is CBP doing, right? To be able to understand how likely is it that you're going to have to file in the CIT, and talking to your broker too, right? Because your broker can tell you, yeah, we filed PSCs and, they're getting processed, or we filed PSCs and we are hearing absolute crickets from customs where nothing is being responded to, because that's going to give you a good indication of how is this really going to go? Are they trying to drag this out, or is it something where they're not necessarily going to make it easy for you, but they're going to follow pretty normal customs procedures? And, there's a lot that has not been normal procedure with customs, over the past year. And so then I would just say, don't assume that it's going to be something where they follow normal procedures with this. It's not a normal situation.
Also, the volume is going to inundate CBP. And this is not just all of CBP processes this. This is, if you will, on the back end of this after, the summary side. And that's a group that deals with that. And, they don't even have close to the staffing of this flood that's coming. So it'll be interesting to see how this, I guess, transpires. So what would you advise, Lila, from your perspective, that importers should be doing here? Obviously, you just talked about talking with their brokers, but talking with brokers is one thing. You got to have some kind of an idea. What do I want to do? Do I really have enough money tied up in this that it's going to make it worthwhile to ask for a refund of these duties, or at least from this point forward, you're not going to have to, assess as much. However, the flip side is some of those current, the trade-off, and I say trade-off, is nobody has a choice in this. If we're looking at a 10 or 15% duty rate on some of these, on some of that is higher in some of these situations. So, I mean, this is going to be an interesting situation.
Yeah, if I were on the importer side right now, and managing trade compliance, managing customs compliance on the importer side, what I would do is I would be pulling my own data to say, okay, this is the number of entries that I paid IEEPA tariffs on. Here's the value of the IEEPA tariffs I paid. Here's the total value, right, of what we would want to request refunds for. And then looking at, from a date perspective, how much of that is within the PSC timeline, how much of that has moved to the protest timeline, right, where I have to file a PSC versus a protest. And then having that presentation with my leadership team to say, here's the total amount that we would request refunds for. Here's the amount that we can file post-summary corrections for, but here's what the timeline is for that. There's no guarantee that it gets responded to at all, right? And it's possible that we get no response and then the entry liquidates and then we have to go file a protest anyway. And here's the cost to file post-summary corrections, right? This is what our broker charges us to do post-summary corrections. And the same for the protest. Here's what's within the protest scope right now. Here's the timeline for response, right? Where at least we know we can get a response, but there's a cost to file that protest. There's a cost to file for accelerated disposition. And then what would the next step be? And then, hey, if those fail, we're looking at a case with the Court of International Trade, and here's an estimate of costs from the trade attorney that we work with, or something like that. So that's kind of the way that I would lay it out in presenting to leadership, to say, here's the steps that we can follow, right? But knowing that there's no guarantee of a response to the PSC, there's no guarantee of a response to the protest. You may end up having to go to CIT, and really, that your bottom lines are, refunds are going to take a significant amount of time. Nobody's getting deposits into their bank account tomorrow, right? Tariffs are going to continue because there's still all of these other avenues for the administration to continue levying tariffs. This isn't the end of tariffs. This is just the end of IEEPA tariffs.
All right. And to that point, here's something that I think you just hit on, some things that are vitally important in the operation side, if you will, that deals with the entries. You're going to need to go in and request from upper management. You need significant IT support to pull down the data and look at it and run it through databases to run your queries to get what you're needing. You're obviously going to need your ACE data. You're going to need information from your broker systems, and be able to pull all that together so you can analyze that. And in asking for IT support, that means they don't just give you the file and then there you go. You need somebody to be able, that has experience, to write queries, to work with you, so that you can, and here's the key thing you just said, prepare a presentation to your upper management, which, Lila, I think that is phenomenal. Is that everybody's trying to figure out what's going on? Well, your upper management is going to want that. And they're going to look to you as a compliance manager, director, whatever, to pull that together. So you need to prepare a presentation. Here's our current situation. Here's the volume of your entries. Here's your aggregate value of duties and taxes paid, and out of all that, of the duties, here's the IEEPA duties. Here's what you've got. Here's what's happening. Does it make it worthwhile? It's going to take time to prepare that, and your IT resources are going to be phenomenal, and they need to be dedicated, whether you have to hire them or not. So requesting IT support, preparing a presentation to upper management, getting that scheduled and on the books so that you can go up and do it, because you're going to probably have more than one presentation. Here's where we have, all right, come back. We want to look at this block or that block or whatever. And then the fourth thing is to look at it from a standpoint of, again, your timelines and your costs, because it's going to take some time to look at legal cost if you go down the CIT route, right?
Yeah, I think if you don't already have a trusted trade attorney, one, right? I think that importers really
Yes.
need to get one, and there's a lot of fantastic firms out there who have, experience with working with the Court of International Trade. And so then, I would highly, highly recommend that if you don't already have one, you go establish a relationship with a trade attorney now, because there's a high likelihood that you might need one. At a minimum, it's something where they can help guide you in terms of understanding and being able to communicate back to your leadership. What would that process look like to have to go through a claim in the Court of International Trade to be able to get your refund, right? What do we are looking at in terms of cost? What are we looking at in terms of timing? Because that's what your leadership is going to want to know. Okay, you're
Hmm.
telling me that, PSC isn't going to get us there, a protest isn't going to get us there. So then what are we going to have to pay a lawyer to go do the CIT case? Because now we got to deduct that from the amount that we're expecting to get in refunds and make a cost benefit decision, right? If you are one of these companies who has paid tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, you're probably going to say, yeah, okay, I'm willing to hire a lawyer to go get that money back, right? But not everybody's got that same level. It depends on the company. It's also something where there's a political question in there, right? Is that you got to worry about, could your company be called out by the Trump administration for suing over refunds, right? Is that a possibility where you could have some kind of public media backlash? I think it's also something that if your company is one where you are B2C, you're, business to consumer, and you have direct consumer sales, you need to involve your public relations people in this, because you need to understand, okay, well, then what happens when our customers are like, well, you're getting a refund. Where's my refund, right? Didn't you raise your prices in response to the tariffs? It's actually something I joked with my husband that my big idea for the Trump administration to get ahead of this was instead just take all the money you collected on IEEPA tariffs and do stimulus checks, right? Say, hey, you know what? These all got passed on to the consumer anyway. You guys have been, gouging people, and that's why there's high inflation that shouldn't be there. And so then I'm going to give it back to the American people. They've talked about doing this in terms of the way that they want to handle health insurance, taking money instead of paying the insurers, taking
Yes.
it and sending it direct to consumers. I think that's something that would be very, very popular, would be
Hmm.
for individual American households to get a tariff refund check instead.
I have to agree with what you're saying that on that realm. And I will also say that, again, strategically in preparing for a presentation to upper management, again, there's maybe multiple things. One being, okay, here's our current situation. The other is, all right, we need to talk about, if we go down this road, what would be the PR side, the marketing side, the impact, the political side, whatever. But it may be worthwhile to also have a customs attorney with you in the presentation of the upper management. I mean, here's one of the things we were talking at the beginning of the show, for example, about ICPA. Man, that would be a great place to. There's several customs attorneys that are in attendance that are not demonstrators. What's the word?
Speakers.
Exhibitors. Yeah, well, there's speakers. There's also exhibitors. That is exactly where you need to go, folks. This would be an ideal situation to take your executive or somebody from the executive levels with you to a conference. The other side of this, if you're an executive, this would be an ideal situation where, hey, I need to ask of my team, I want a presentation on this, and understand you're going to need to cough up some resources because the compliance people, this is doing a huge amount of data mining that they don't have the resources for normally. No, I would almost guarantee 99.9% do not. They need some help, and they need some people in there, even at just gathering information and putting it through the ringer, if you
Yeah.
will.
Well, there's an Ask the Legal Eagles section, so you
There
can go
is.
listen to some of the smartest legal minds in trade in the Ask the Legal Eagles session. That's definitely a great place. But yeah, I would say definitely for those that are attending ICPA or considering attending ICPA, you can talk to some wonderful trade lawyers there. And I would say just the networking of talking to other trade compliance folks about what they're doing. You can get really great ideas about how to structure this. Some of the key people that I would suggest that, trade compliance folks include too, with you're doing that presentation to leadership, if you have a government affairs person in your organization,
Definitely.
absolutely include them. Finance,
Excellent.
right?
Yes.
Finance needs to be in there because you know what they want to know? They want to know, when can I post accruals for this?
Mm-hmm.
When can I post accruals for the millions of dollars of tariff refunds that you're going to go get for us, right? And so they need to understand this isn't really guaranteed. And there's not this, distinct timeline where I can tell you we file a PSC and 90 days later, they approve it and we get the refund. That it doesn't work that way. So you need to make sure that you're communicating all these different scenarios and what that's going to cost in terms of time and labor.
Yep. Lila, thank you so much. We could keep going here for a little bit, but I think we have provided enough discussion on the situation and definitive actions that we're suggesting for people out there. And folks, I want to tell you, this is one of those where if you didn't have enough to do already, now this has gotten even more. And understand, networking with other folks in the industries, in compliance industry and all that's great. But also understand too, nobody's got a definitive answer to say, hey, I've got it all worked out and here's what we're going to do. Everybody is almost like the deer in the headlight to the shock and awe to, okay, I know this much and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then we'll go from there. So, with all that, you need to develop your plan, get your people. Lila, you have made some fantastic suggestions with pulling in the different folks around and all of that. So any last thoughts before we close up?
Yeah, just say, I posted this on LinkedIn and it's really still how I feel, is that, giving each other grace right now is really important. This is an unprecedented situation, right? To be talking about trying to go after all of these refunds and not having a clear process. And so whether it's your broker you're dealing with or a trade attorney or a consultant or the other functions in your organization or people on your team, try to give each other grace, realize that we're all trying to figure this out together and try to work through it, and just lean on your trade community to be able to help you as we work through the refund process.
Well, I appreciate those comments. Lalo, I will say this is one of those where definitely, hopefully this can get out quickly, but also the courses that you're offering on some of this come into play. Getting a good foundation on knowledge, and so people can apply the new knowledge they learn from your courses to directly into their job right off the bat.
Yeah, and ironically, next week we do start a 4-week program with Lila. Not even planned or anything. I just thought of that now. Is that
true.
she's doing a 4-week program.
I did plan it. I talked to SCOTUS. You said, hey, this is the best timing for me. Could you make that happen? They were like, who are you and how did you get my phone number?
Good stuff.
FBI.
So it's 4 weeks of, we call it Develop a Trade Compliance Program. And we literally talk about pretty much a lot of this, but mostly how to, like you said, how to set a foundation for your trade program so that you're prepared for these kind of things, and of course it could hit you. You can get blindsided with a lot of stuff like this. I mean, which a lot of people did last year around this time. But if you have a good foundation and program it's not going to impact you as much because you would have a plan on what to do. Correct, Lila?
Right. Yeah. It's having a foundational compliance program allows you to move out of firefighting mode and to be more strategic and to know what you're going to do when changes to your plan happen. Right. The best laid plans don't survive contact with the enemy. And so then you need to be prepared for when the regulatory environment suddenly gets upended.
Well, thank you. Yes, and thank you all for joining us. Hopefully, we'll catch a lot of you over at ICPA next week, and we'll be there. We're going to have what is called a media center or a media booth or a media, whatever you might want to call it. But we'll be having our cameras and microphones all set up in case you all want to drop by and say hi and get on camera with us.
Definitely.
I'll see you then.
All right.
All right, folks. Have a great day.